Hello, my name is Tinne from Victoria Designs, and today I have the second part of our Treasures of Nature series for you, the Early Birds Kit. If you don't know what I mean with Treasures of Nature series, I recommend watching the first video of this series, the link is below. In short, it's a series of 4 kits of printables that belong together with 4 different tutorials that together form one whole. Alexandra from Alexandra made different tutorials for journals with all 4 parts and also an extra tutorial to keep all these books in one place, a journal stand. In this tutorial, Alexandra will show you how to make the second journal with the printables of this Early Birds kit. And that's not all. She also provided a tutorial how to make an ephemera holder that you can keep in one of the drawers. The tutorial for the journal stand and the first journal are of course already published on our YouTube channel as well. The other tutorials will be released later this year. I generally recommend these tutorials for more experienced crafters. Alexandra explains things very well, but some parts in the tutorial go a bit quicker, so it's best to have some experience making journals already. Of course, you don't have to make these exact projects with these printables, you can make a bunch of other crafts with them as well. If you'd like to see more of Alexandra's amazing tutorials, pay a visit to our YouTube channel, the link is below. If you would like to make this project with the beautiful printables of our Early Birds kit, or if you're just super curious, you can discover it in our Etsy shop, the link is below as well. And now, here's Alexandra. Enjoy!
Hello everyone, it's Alexandra. I am very excited to share today's video with all of you because we will keep on working on our large junk journaling station project. And for those of you who are new and who are joining only today, I want to remind and also explain that in the first part of the series, we have created the box itself and the first journal, which was butterfly themed one, and the second one that I'm going to show you today and also explain how to make it is a bird themed one. So that's the book. And you can also see that we have 2 drawers here, and one of them as of right now has the ephemera holder, which was also created with the papers from the bird themed collection. So if that's something that you want to create together with me, keep on watching the video. Our bird-themed journal will have 3 signatures in it, and here I have started to put the signatures together. We will get back to them just a little bit later. The signatures will be attached to the spine, which will be about 2 inches wide, which corresponds to 2.5 centimeters. And for creating the inner spine, to which the signatures will actually be bound, I need a piece of cardstock. Here's just plain white, and this piece measures 3 3/4 inch wide by 8.5 inches long. I will score it on the short side at 1 inch. I will flip it and score at 1 inch again. And then I will turn it over and score the area between the previously created score lines at every 1/8 of an inch. Now you will see that because of the fact that you created score lines here, the spine, this piece that will turn into the spine, already wants to kind of naturally curve, and that's what we want. You will then go ahead and fold the flaps on the sides, and this is what you're going to have. Next thing that I want to do here is to create the guidelines for future poking of the holes that we are going to bind our signatures onto. And for creating the guidelines, I will measure from either corner that you want to start with, I will measure 2¼ Then I will make a mark at 4¼ and at 6¼ and then you will make an additional set of marks just to make sure that when you sketch the guidelines, they are straight. And then you will create again guidelines at 1½ at 1 7/8 and at 2¼ and then you can go ahead and mark in the same places a little bit lower so that you connect both of the marks together, or you can just use your score line as a guide as well and lightly, very lightly, use your pencil to sketch a line on top. This is how it's going to look. And then at the intersection of those lines, you're going to poke the holes. Next, we will need a piece of fabric. In my case, this is cotton. You can also use muslin, but the fabric needs to be rather thin. The width of this fabric piece is about 2½ inches, and it will go on top of the cardstock like so. The length of the fabric can vary, but you just need to have little pieces that you will be able to wrap around the edges of the cardstock like that. For gluing the fabric down to the paper, I'm going to use glue stick. And next I want to transfer the poked holes to this side of the cardstock and fabric. So I will flip my paper to the back and just re-poke those holes so that I'm able to see them again on this side of the piece that I'm working with. And next I will flip this piece to the back and get another strip of fabric. This time the width of the fabric will be about 1½ inch, and it will be glued down on the back of the cardstock, right between the flaps. You will have to center it. So the width is about 1½ inch, and the length needs to be just a little bit smaller than 8½ so that it fits the paper and allows you to wrap the fabric flaps at the top and at the bottom without folding the narrower fabric piece. And that's what you're going to have at this point. I will fold the flaps again just so that I see where the center of the binding is, like the central part of it. Okay, this is what we have. You can now go ahead and distress the edges. And I also like to add some stitching at the top and at the bottom. After stitching, I pull the threads to the back and tie them in double knots and trim the excess threads. So that's our piece that we're going to use for binding the signatures onto. Let's get back now to the signatures. So each one of my signatures consists of a mix of double-sided printed page designs from the paper collection, as well as some tea-dyed 8½ by 11 papers folded in half. Also some papers from different paper pads that I had. Some have graph papers, Some have just lines, and some look like this. And then at the end of each one of the signatures, I want to have these faux file folders. They are included in the paper pack, and I want to hide the threads of the binding inside these file folders, and then add the glue at the top and at the bottom to seal them closed and turn them into pockets. So that's what I'm going to do. Let's count how many pages I have in each one of the signatures, as they're all the same. So one, printed on both sides, page design, tea stain paper, graph paper, printed page design, tea stain paper, another paper from a random paper pad, page design, tea stain paper, craft paper from a paper pad, one more page design, another sheet from the paper pad, and then the faux file folder. So all of my signatures will have the same order of pages and the same amount of pages. Now I'm just going to make sure that I position the pages the way I want. If you need to center any of them, that's the good time to do that, because we are going now to poke the holes in the signatures. And for doing that, I will use a simple template that I have created with holes in the same places where they're going to be on the binding. So the same position at 2 1/4, 4 1/4, and 6 1/4 of an inch. I will have those holes pre-poked in the template, and I'm going to use the template. You can use your punching cradle, or just put your folded template inside the signature and hold it really tight with your fingers, and then go, oh yeah, and I want to actually hold the whole stack of papers except for the file folder, since it is short, but I will hold the rest with a paper clip just to make sure that they don't move too much. So now I'm holding everything together and I poke the holes. Okay, now it's just important to make sure that our file folder doesn't move, so I will put my poking tool inside one of the holes while I fetch the threads that we're going to use for the binding. You can use any type of thread or waxed cord that you're used to use while you're making your journals. I'm going to use just some upholstery thread from Coates & Clark. And as for the length of the thread, I usually take 2 heights of my pages plus a little bit extra. Now I'm going to bind the signatures to the inner spine that we have created before. I have added some stamping. I thought it could look interesting. Now I'm going to use the 3-hole pamphlet stitch for adding my signatures to the spine, and I will speed this process up. The first signature is now attached. I will glue the file folder together just a little bit later, but I like the fact that all the threads are disguised inside the file folder, so you can't see any of them here. You can use 5 holes pamphlet stitch if you want to, but I thought that for the amount of pages that we have here, the 3 holes will be just enough. So I will now continue attaching 2 remaining signatures, and then I'll get back to you. The third signature has been attached as well. All of them are now connected to the inner spine, and they're still quite flat, so it's a good time to add either stamping or stenciling if you want to your pages. That's what I'm going to do. I have a few stencils here that I have chosen, so I will do it offline and get back to you later. Let's talk now about the cover for our journal. I have done some prep work, and I will explain to you now what you are going to do. You will need 2 pieces of medium weight chipboard for the cover base, and both of the pieces will measure 8 5/8 by 5 7/8. Then you will connect both of the chipboard pieces to a piece of white, in my case white cardstock. It's the same quality, 65 pounds, as the one that I have used for creating the inner binding. And this piece will measure 8 5/8 by 2 7/8, and you will score it at 1/2 inch from the left and the right side, similar to how we did with the inner spine piece. And then you will flip it to the opposite side, and you will again score the area between the first score lines at every 1/8 of an inch to create that curved look, if you remember. And then you will glue your chipboard pieces to the side flaps of the white cardstock up to the first score line in each case. So this is how I glued mine, and here the same thing. So that's the base of our cover. Now when you unfold the cover, on the inside of the cover you will draw guidelines on the left and the right hand side from the spine, and these will be 1 inch away from the edges of the chipboard. Then for wrapping the cover, I'm going to use a piece of ivory colored cotton. For gluing the fabric down to the paper and the chipboard, I'm going to again use my glue stick, and I will glue it down in sections. The fabric has been glued down to the chipboard and the paper, and we will do the same thing for wrapping the edges of the fabric. When the long flaps have been done, I'm going to trim these sections in the corners like so, leaving just a little bit of fabric at the top. Next, I will add some glue in the corners and fold the fabric at an angle. That's how it will look like. I'll do the same with the opposite corner. Here we go. And now I can add glue along the edge, fold the fabric in, and take it to iron once again. And you will do the same on the opposite short side. You will iron it, and now your base cover is ready. Let's just make sure that our signatures with the inner binding fit in the cover nicely. I'm going to use my distress ink and distress the cover all the way around in the front and on the inside. And here is how my cover looks like right now. I have added ink onto the fabric on the spine as well to make it less bright. Also similar to the first book in our series where I had some stamping on the spine, I have decided to create this second book in kind of a similar style. So I have stamped just a little bit on the spine there. And now I will cover the front and the back with the papers. These are the papers that I chose from the paper collection. Both of the pieces measure the same. They are 5 3/4 by 8.5. I have distressed the edges for my front. I chose a rather neutral color of the designer paper since I want to add more elements to it later, and I'm still not sure what will be there. So that's why I chose something neutral. And then for the back, I chose this gorgeous, absolutely gorgeous design with the feathers. Once I glue these to the fabric, I'm going to take it to my sewing machine and add a line of stitching first along this edge of the cover. I will pull the threads to the back and then stitch from this corner like this and finish at this corner at the bottom. And then I will do the same with the back of my cover and show you the result. The stitching has been now completed. This is how the cover looks like at the moment. I want to have 2 of the books in our series of 4 have a similar design, and then the third and the fourth one will also be a little bit similar. At least that's the plan for now. On my first book, I had these leather bands on the spine. I have prepared the bands for the spine of the bird book as well. And then if we had a tassel at the top of the spine on our butterfly book, which allowed us to easily pull the book out of the compartment, we will have to come up with something similar for our bird book as well. Depending on what you will have in your stash, you might come up with another idea for the so-called pull mechanism for your book, but I thought that I could use this metal element. I am going to attach it with one of the brads to the spine of the journal, and then I will have on the bulb pin this little so-called coin that I have created with the number 2 on it. To create the coin, I just punched out 2 circles out of gold foiled cardstock, and the circles are about 1 inch in diameter. So there are 2 circles which are glued together back to back to create the base. Then in the back of the coin, I have added a piece of craft cardstock, also punched a circle out of it, and the circle is 7/8 of an inch in diameter. And then I also have added the circle that I have punched, actually die cut, out of the faux leather, and I have previously die cut the number 2 in that faux leather circle as well. Then I added a little eyelet and put it on the pin. So I'm going to just attach it like that to the hook that I have right here, and then I will pull the book out of the compartment that it will be stored in by the coin. So now I'm going to glue the leather bands to the spine of my book. Even though the glue is quite strong, I still want to make sure that the leather pieces don't start to lift up over time. So I'm going to add the brads close to the edges of each one of the bands, similar to how we did it in the case of the first journal. After the brads have been attached, I'm going to add my hook to the middle leather band. I will add my coin onto the hook now just to see how it looks. I think it looks nice, so we will add more details to the spine later. And in the meanwhile, we will keep on working on the inside pages of our journal, as well as on the insides of the front and the back cover. Let me show you on some of the pages the stamping and stenciling that I have added. For stenciling, I have used 2 colors of distress inks. One was peeled paint. It's the green, and the brown was my favorite vintage photo. Here, for example. Once I had all the stenciling on the pages done, I played with one of my script stamps and stamped the pages on top of the stenciled areas. And I think it turned out really nice. Then I wanted for my embellishments to use little clusters. I wanted them to be rather small, and the fussy cut pages of the collection included beautiful images. There were quite a lot of tags and stamps and different labels among them, and I wanted more of this kind of images. That's why I turned to the journaling pages of the collection, and I tried to search on them for some elements that I wanted to use on the clusters. So here, for example, on this page, I have marked it so that I could show you faster what I meant. So on this page, for example, I would definitely go ahead and cut out one or even both of the birds, or maybe this element here from the branches and leaves, or on this journaling page here, I liked this bird that I could easily mark with a lasso tool, and then copy and paste it to a Word document or a new JPEG file. And even if you select the image roughly with the lasso tool, then when you print it out, you can fussy cut as precise as you can this image with the scissors. As a result, I had a page full of different smaller elements. These leaves, for example, and I went ahead and altered the size of the leaves, but the base image of these comes from the fussy cut element, which was included in the paper collection. So I selected only them with a lasso tool in Paint, and then when I transferred them to a Word document, for example, I
just played with the sizes, and that's how I got many of the leaves in different sizes right here. The same thing goes for the birds. So here are some little birds from the journaling pages again. So this one, for example, here, this little guy, he comes from this journaling page, as you can see, and he is the same size this time. So one of the birds has her or his tail chopped off, but that's fine, because then you can use some other elements and just, you know, cover the areas that were maybe not ideally fussy cut, or they're just missing, like in the case of this bird. So yeah, lots and lots of little pieces that I really needed here to be able to create more embellishments for my book. And there are quite a few birds. There are also some floral images and leaves and branches, and all of these are taken from the journaling pages. And Tina has a tutorial on her channel, on Victoria Designs channel, that explains to you in details how you can work with your digital paper collections and with your journaling pages if you want to have images from the pages, but you don't want to print the whole page, to use only tiny section from the page. I started all this in order to be able to create these tiny clustered embellishments for my journal. I still don't know if I will be using them on tags or journaling cards, or I will just add them to the pages of my book, like so. But all of them have been created with those little images that I selected from the pages. The next thing that I want to show you is the cover. I have used some of the dies that I had in my collection, and I have fussy cut some of those little elements from the pages that I showed you before, and added those on the cover as well. Here, for example, you see that bird with the chopped off tail, but it looks quite fine on the cover. Here there are those leaves from the image that I also showed you before, so I wanted to use only parts of this image, and I have them here. I have one of those branches and flowers from one of the pages that I also showed you right here. Then this, I don't remember if it was a journaling page or one of the journaling cards, but of course it is from the paper collection. Then here I have one of the labels from the fussy cut sheets, and this feather was one of the Sizzix and Tim Holtz's dies, as well as this gold foiled label behind the little bird. Then the bird eggs were also created with the help of one of the dies from Sizzix and Tim Holtz. And this tiny tag was created with the help of the die as well, and that label. That's how the front of my book looks like. And I have also added the birds and the leaves from the small fussy cut elements to the spine of my journal. And we can keep on working on our journal now. And the next stage will be to attach the signatures to the book cover. Before you glue the signatures down to the cover, just make sure that you have those guidelines, which are 1 inch away from the edges of the chipboard. Okay, and they will help us to align the fins of our signatures. I'll put just a piece of scrap paper under this paper section here, and I will apply the glue. And then when you glue the signatures down, just make sure that you follow your guideline. Once that section is glued down, you will do the same in the front. You might need to lift the cover just a little bit so that you can reach that guideline with the fin of the signatures. We can now leave it to dry, put it aside, and work on the sections that we are going to add to the inside of the front cover. And the first thing that we're going to need is a craft cardstock piece that measures 10 3/4 by 8 1/2, and on the long side here you will score it at 4 5/8 and at 5 inches. After you add the score lines, you will see that this cardstock piece will be divided into 2 sections. In the narrower section, we're going to create a window with a little notch so that later on we can add a nice and interesting string closure there on that page. So for creating the window, first of all, we will be now working only with the narrower section. The gusset is not included. You will sketch the lines on all 4 edges of the narrow section, and those lines will be 1 inch away from the edges, 1 inch away. Okay, and then the 4th line will be 1 inch away from the fold line, from the score line, just like so. You will have a rectangular shape sketched on the narrow section of the cardstock. On the long line, which is closer to the outer edge of your cardstock, you will mark the middle. It will be 3 1/4 of an inch away from either top or bottom. And the diameter of the circle that you're going to use here is going to be 1 1/2 inch. That's why I have punched out a little circle here with the help of one of my punches. You will fold it in half first, and then you will fold it in half again, making sure that the previous folded edges match one another. You will poke the hole in the center of the circle, just like so. And while you have the poking tool inside that hole, you will match the centers of the circle with the intersection of the tick mark and the line that you had. And while you hold your poking tool down there, you will put the circle down on the cardstock, making sure that the folds of your circle match the sketched line on the cardstock. And while you hold everything with your fingers like so, you can take the poking tool away and just trace around your punched circle, around 1/2 of it, to create the notch, the future notch. Okay, now we're ready to cut out the window itself. The way which was convenient for me is this. First of all, don't forget to protect the surface, and then I will first cut along the long line, which is close to the gusset. Then I will cut the short lines. Then on this long line, I will cut only up to the areas where my half circle begins. like that. This is how it looks in the front. And then I am going to take scissors and first roughly trim the center piece just like so. And now you can slowly work your way around that notch that we're going to create. Just like this. So here is our shape of the window. We can also go ahead and poke the hole where it was supposed to be. Now for embellishing the window, we're going to need a few pieces of pattern paper and a piece of acetate. The piece of acetate that I have here is 3.5 inches by 7.5, and both of the paper pieces are going to be 8.25 inches by 4 3/8. Here are the designs that I chose. This one will be in the front, and the one with the birds will be on the inside. I have already distressed the outer edges of these paper pieces with the vintage photo distress ink. Now, if you put the paper piece on top of the narrow section of the craft cardstock, you will see that there is a border of about 1/8 of an inch all the way around. So you are going to center it so that the borders equal all around, and then you're going to use a paper clip and clip this paper piece down to the craft cardstock, maybe even in 2 places, so that it really is secure and doesn't move. Again, make sure that the borders are even all the way around. You will carefully flip this paper piece to the front or to the back of the pattern paper, and you will trace the shape of the opening just like so. Now we are going to take this paper piece. So we have a border of 1/8 of an inch on the outside of this paper piece. We will also need a border of 1/8 of an inch on the inside of this paper piece. And to create the border, you can either use one of the rulers with the measurements on them, like the one that I have here. So all around the sketched window that I have on the cardstock piece, I'm going to create another outline which will be 1/8 of an inch away from the first one. We also need to create the half circle shape right here. For doing that, we are going to need another circle which was punched out of plain paper. I have once again folded it in half and made sure that the folds meet. I have a punched out hole in this circle too. Now let's measure the line that we have here. It's 6 3/4 of an inch long. That means that our center is at 3 3/8. So I'm going to do the same thing. I have my circle ready, and I'm going to match the center of this circle with the center on the line, and I'm going to trace the half circle shape like so. Now I will cut out the window the same way as I did before. the shape of the paper in the front will have to be the same, just a mirrored reflection of it. So I'm just going to put the papers one to another, back to back. I'll make sure that I clip them together so that they do not move. And I will trace the window shape on the second paper piece. It would be good to distress the inner edge of the window. Okay, I have distressed the edges. Now, before we add the acetate, let's see once again how we need to correct the shape of the half circle on the craft cardstock. So I'm going to center my pattern paper piece on top of the craft cardstock. I'm going to clip it down, and you can draw a faint line with a pencil, trying to repeat the shape of the half circle on the pattern paper. And now I can trim the excess paper, and I think this way our half circle will look way better. Yes, way better. I love it. Now I am just going to erase the pencil marks. Now we are ready to attach our acetate piece. I'm going to add the glue around the opening that I have cut out, and then around the edge of the acetate. I'm using the art glitter glue, so I hope that it will glue the acetate down quite good. And the glue should also dry clear. When you apply the glue to the half circle shape there, just try to stay a little bit away from the very edge, because our pattern paper, if you remember, is not covering the whole section up. So we just don't want the glue to show in there. Now I can add my frame. So I'm applying the glue. Let's try and center it. Now we will have to transfer the hole from the back of our cardstock piece through the acetate and the pattern paper to the front, and then add the closure that we're going to use. We'll make a string closure there. And for creating the closure, I have used the circles, 2 circles of the 1 inch diameter, and punched a hole through the center. Set the brad on the back, just like so. And now I'm ready to glue down the second paper piece on top. This is how it looks. For the next step, you are going to need a piece of craft cardstock that measures 8.5 inches by 9 3/4, and on the long side you will score it at 3 3/4, 9 inches, and 9 1/4. You can see that I have created another tab. It's going to be a tab on this 3 3/4 of an inch section. To create it, I used my envelope punch board, and I put the paper to the envelope punch board like this. I have the flaps and the gussets at the bottom. I placed the paper into the punch board so that the corner of the paper matched the 3-inch mark on the board, and punched it out. Then I moved it to the right and placed it right in the center of the opening there, and punched again to create a nice shape in the corner. Now I'm just going to trim this paper section at the bottom. So here I have a nice tab on my future pocket. This will form a pocket on one of our pages. Now a piece of paper for this section of the page, and that's the paper that I chose. It measures 2 1/4 by 8 1/4, and I am ready now to glue it down with a little border around 3 edges. Now on the front of the pocket, I'm still not gluing it down. For embellishing the front of the pocket, I'm using a piece of pattern paper with the birds, and the paper piece measures 3 1/8 by 8 1/4. And I have also added a piece of acetate with some gold foiled washi tape wrapped around the edges of the acetate piece, and I have also added zigzag stitching to the acetate only to save time. So once you prepare your piece of acetate with the foiled washi tape and the stitching, you're going to either clip it to your pattern page, or you're going to glue lightly in the corners the acetate to the paper. Next, I'm going to glue this whole piece down to the craft cardstock and take it to my sewing machine and stitch all around the pattern paper and the acetate. Oh, and one more thing. At the bottom of this paper piece, I have added a stopper because I plan to add a tag behind the acetate band, so I don't want it to fall out from the page. So I'm going to glue this piece down and stitch all around and get back. And here it is. The stitching has been done. This is how it looks in the back. Now I'm ready to add glue only to the short sides of this pocket and glue it down. This way on our page we will have a pocket right here. Now we will embellish the back of this page with a pocket. I'm going to use a piece of pattern paper. The piece of pattern paper measures 5 inches by 8 1/4, and I'm also going to have here in the corner a little pocket or a tuck spot, and for creating that I'm going to use a piece of craft cardstock which measures 5 1/2 by 5, and you're going to score it at 4 1/2 inches on the 5-inch side, and you're going to score it at 5 inches on the 5 1/2 inch side to create the flaps. You will then snip off the corner like so to create the angled cut. I made first some marks on the paper starting from the corner right here. So one tick mark was 2 1/2 inches away from the top left corner, and the second one was 2 1/4 inches down from that same corner. Then I used my ruler to connect both of the marks, and now I'm going to cut that corner off. Don't forget to distress the cut off edge. To mat the pocket, you're going to need a piece of pattern paper of your choice, and it's going to measure 4 3/4 by 4 1/4. The places that you will have to mark to snip off the corner on this piece are going to be exactly the same as on the craft cardstock piece, 2 1/2 inches away from the top right corner right now, because it's a mirrored reflection of the base of the pocket, and 2 1/4 inches down from the top right corner on this side. You're going to once again snip that corner off so it creates a nice matting piece for our pocket with 1/8 of an inch border all around. And then I'm also going to add an acetate pocket to the bottom of this corner tuck, so the width of the pocket is 4.25, the same as the width of the pattern paper, and it will be only 2 inches tall. The same way I wrapped a foiled washi around one edge of the acetate and zigzag stitched on top of it. Now I'm going to glue this pattern paper piece to the pocket, stitch along 3 edges here. This is how it looks now. Next, I'm ready to glue the flaps of the corner pocket behind the pattern paper piece. And once they're glued down, I can take this whole piece to my sewing machine again and stitch all around the 4 sides of it and get back. And now with the stitching being done, we are ready to glue this whole paper piece to the unembellished side of our page with the pocket. And here, this part of our page is ready. Before gluing it down to the page that we created before, I want us to work a little bit more on this section of the page with the window frame. For embellishing it, you will first of all need a piece of pattern paper. That's the design that I chose. The paper piece measures 8.25 by 5.5. And again, to save some time, I have already prepared my acetate belly band, which is 2 3/4 inch wide by 5.5 inches long. I have wrapped the long edges of the acetate piece with the gold foiled washi tape and added the zigzag stitching. Then I secured the acetate piece on the pattern paper just here in the corners. It was very easy to center the belly band on the pattern paper because it will have to be about 2 3/4 inch away from both the top and the bottom of the pattern paper piece. I have glued this paper down with the acetate belly band to the craft cardstock page. And next I want to create 2 flaps that will be glued down to the top and the bottom of my page, like so. For creating the base of these flaps, they will be the same size, and you will just create them according to the measurements that I'm going to provide you right now. You're going to need, first of all, 2 craft cardstock pieces that are going to measure 5.5 by 4.25 inch. And on the short side here, you're going to score at 3 3/4 and 3 7/8. This will create a little flap and 1/8 inch gusset on our future flap. Then to create the tab, you're going to use again your envelope punch board, and on the side, which is away from the flap and the gusset, you're going to punch the notches at 1.5 inch away from the corner. So you're going to place it like so in your punch board and align the corner with the mark of 1.5 inch. Punch, then flip it like so. Again, align the corner with 1.5 inch mark and punch again. So you will create 2 of those notches, and you will have to cut off the remaining paper sections that will be here. So you will be left with the tab only. And then I just went ahead and used the corner rounder of the envelope punch board to round the corners of both of my flaps. So these are the bases of our flaps that are going to be attached to our page, like so. We're going to mat them. For matting these, first of all, you're going to pay attention at the direction of the papers that you're going to use. So the pieces that I chose for the front have this pattern, and they have also the rounded corners on one long side of each one of those pieces, and both of the pieces measure 3 1/4 by 5 3/8. Okay, so I'm going to glue the pattern paper pieces down to the fronts of my flaps, and then the backs of the flaps will be embellished again with 2 additional pieces of pattern paper, and once again they will both measure 3 1/4 by 5 3/8. Before I'm going to mat the insides of my flaps with the pattern papers, I am going to mark the places where I am later on going to have the circles for the string closure, and the holes for the circles are 1 inch away from the edge of the tab right here, and they're 2 3/4 away from either left or right edge of the cardstock. So I'm just going to poke these through for now. Once you punch the hole through, glue the pattern paper piece for the front of your tag down to the craft cardstock, and transfer the hole again from the back of the cardstock to the front of the piece with the pattern paper. I'm going to place my 1 inch circle with a brad to the front of the flap, and then cover it with the piece of the pattern paper in the back, just like so. 2 flaps are ready. Now I'm going to attach them by these 3/8 of an inch flaps to the back of the wider section of the page with the window, and you will notice that the flap is a little bit narrower than the main section of the page, so you're just going to center your flap on the page, and in the same way you're going to glue the second flap to the bottom of the page, and you're gluing it down so that you still have the 1/8 of an inch gusset there. Next I'm going to glue the right hand side of the page down to the main one, like so. I will apply the glue to the flap and attach it to the part of the page with the window right up to the fold line. And now I'm going to take this whole thing to my sewing machine and add stitching around the 4 edges of this part of the paper. And here it is. I have added stitching. This is how it looks in the back. We are almost ready to glue this whole element down to the inside of our front cover. But before we do that, please do not forget to add the string that will hold closed the flap with the window. You're going to add your string to the back of this whole page element. In the center, it's going to be 4 and 4 1/4 of an inch away from either top or bottom of the page. I'm going to add first some glue and then add the thread in there. And also I'm going to secure it with a piece of either clear tape or painter's tape, whatever you have. Okay, so I'm going to add a piece of tape like so, and you can trim the excess thread if you want to, if it seems like too long, which in my case it really is probably too long. So I'm going to trim it, and then I might add some kind of paper embellishment to the end of the thread in there. I think that right now we are going to glue this whole section down to the inside of our front cover. I'm going to use my strong glue for that. When you glue this section down, start aligning it from the edge of the cover on your left hand side, and also make sure that you align it at the top and at the bottom. I think I'm going to open all of the flaps, and I will keep the cover down as flat as possible so that I can press and burnish everything down. And this is what we have. It has been attached. We can add another piece of string behind one of the circles right here. Okay, I think we are ready now to work on the inside of the back cover. Oh, and before we forget, let's seal the file folders to form the pockets. I'm going to apply the glue along the short sides like so, and just glue everything together. So our pockets in the centers of the signatures will be ready. You're going to do that for all 3 of the pockets that you have in the centers of each one of your 3 signatures. Now we are going to work on the insert for the back cover of our notebook. And before I give you all the measurements, I wanted to point out that I have added a very simple bookmark to the back cover. I have attached it with the help of a brad. For creating the base of the insert, you are going to need a piece of cardstock that will measure 11 inches by 8.5, and on the long side you will score it at 5 3/4 and at 6 inches. To make the flap that will go on top look a little bit more interesting, I want to create a certain shape for it. For the flap itself, you're going to need a piece of cardstock that will measure 4.5 by 8.5. And on the short side, you will score it at 3 3/4 and at 4 inches. Let's talk about the shape. I just don't want to have square corners, that's all. So I'm going to measure 1 1/4 inch to each side of the corner, at the top and at the bottom of the flap. So I'm going to measure 1 1/4 inch and make a tick mark in both places, also at the opposite corner. And then I'm going to trim the corner along the guideline. This will be the shape of our flap. Let's make sure that we erase the tick marks. I want to create a see-through window on this part of the base insert, and I want the window to resemble the shape of the flap that will go on top. Let's make some more measurements on this flap right here. We will start with creating this vertical guideline right here, and it will be 3 inches away from the edge of the cardstock piece. And now I'm going to measure from this place right here 1 1/4 inch down and make a mark on the guideline that I have created before. And I will also measure 1 1/4 inch to my right hand side and make a tick mark. Then, as before, connect both of them with a line. And now do the same at the bottom, 1 1/4 inch away from the bottom edge of the paper, and make a tick mark on the line. And also 1 1/4 inch to the right from the guideline, make a tick mark again, and connect both of those like so. So you can see that we have the same shape as the shape of the flap. Now we're going to create our window right here. I'm going to use a ruler with the grid lines because it will be easier to measure 1/2 inch from each of the lines that we have previously created, and also 1/2 inch away from the edge of the cardstock itself. That's what I'm going to do now. I will probably start from the edge. Now you can see that we have the shape. So let's now cut out the window that we have created and continue from there. We're going to cover this flap with the designer paper. I have chosen this pattern from the collection that I'm working with. And this paper piece measures 4 3/4 by 8 1/4. I will now center this piece on top of the flap that will be the front one on our insert. I will probably use 2 clips just to make sure that the paper doesn't shift. And now I'm going to flip this to the back and trace the shape of the opening that I have. Make sure that the cardstock piece doesn't move and you create a straight line. I will write here that this is the front, put it aside. Now I will flip the cardstock piece to the back and take another piece of paper. It's the same pattern, and the measurement for this paper piece is also the same. Now I will put this on the back side of the flap the same way, with a 1/8 of an inch border all around. Clip it again, flip it to the front, make sure that it's still good. Yeah. And now I will trace the shape of the opening on this piece of pattern paper as well. And I think that we can just use a ruler here just to hold the paper down so that it doesn't move, and then trace that edge right there. Put it aside for now. We'll take the pattern paper that we're going to use for the front, and we're going to cut out the window in it. Like so. If you distressed the edges of your paper pieces, distress the edges of the opening as well. And for the next step, you will need a piece of acetate. The piece of acetate that I have measures 8 inches by 3 1/4. And I'm going to glue it down right on top of the opening, and you will have more of the acetate on your left hand side here. And I'm going to glue it down about 1/4 inch away from the right hand side. And of course, use your bone folder to burnish and spread the glue. Okay, like this. Now I'm going to glue this piece of paper on top, lining it up with the edges and the borders of the opening. Now I'm going to take this to my sewing machine and add the line of stitching all around the opening, and also about, I think, 1/4 inch away from the edge of the craft cardstock piece, right here. I will do this and get back to you to show it closer. Like this. Okay, all the way around, and I secured the threads with a piece of tape in the back. Now we will get back to the piece of the pattern paper that we're going to use for the back of our flap. It's the time now for cutting out the opening in it. And inking the edges of the opening. And adding another piece of acetate that will also measure 8 by 3 1/4. I'm going to glue it down in the back of this paper piece, and we'll stitch this the same way we stitched on the flap here. And here it is ready. We need to poke a hole for the string closure that we're going to have on this flap. Here I have 2 1-inch circles of craft paper glued down together, and then there is another smaller circle of gold foiled paper that I have used on top of the previous one for the accent. Now our hole will have to be poked somewhere here, and it will be 4 1/4 inch away from either top or bottom edge of the cardstock, and you will have to measure about 1 1/8 inch away from the fold line right here. So I will use 2 rulers for doing that. Okay, so I have 4 1/4 here, and I am 1 1/8 inch away from the fold line. So I will mark the place for poking the hole and poke it through. And now I'm going to add the circle. I'm going to use a piece of tape to cover the prongs of the bread on this side. That's the front, and this will be the back. Now we can't glue this paper piece all the way down to the craft cardstock base that we have, because I want this to be a pocket. So I'm going to just secure it with a very thin line of glue along this edge, and I'm going to center it and line it up with the opening. make sure that I have equal borders around the edges of this paper piece. And then I will glue it down. It doesn't have to be glued down like 100% secure, because once we have it connected to the base cardstock piece, we're going to take this to our sewing machine, and on this side we're going to stitch from here around the edges like so, and finish here at the bottom. That's what we have. Now I will just tie double knots here. Once I tie the double knot and trim the threads, I will just add a tiny bit of glue there and press with my fingers. And now we have a pocket here in this flap. This is how it looks. We will put something inside, of course, but now we will get back to our flap that we have created before, and we just need to embellish it with the designer papers, and also add the second circle for the string closure. So I'm going now to glue down the papers that I have chosen for this flap. For the front part of it, I have chosen this design. The piece itself will have to measure 3.5 by 8.25. And this is the design that I have chosen for the inside of the flap. It will go right here. So first of all, we need to snip the corners to form the same shape that we have on the flap. And for doing that, first of all, you will have to fold both the flap and the gusset so that they're not visible. And you will line this pattern piece of paper on top of the cardstock flap so that you have equal borders all around. And then you will kind of eyeball and make tick marks on the patterned paper about 1.25 inches away from the edge of the craft cardstock, which you can see underneath. So I'm going to do it like that, and then of course trim along the tick marks. Now you have the perfect shape. I'm going to measure and cut the corners for the piece of paper that will go on the inside of the flap the same way. I want to glue down the piece for the front of the flap right now, and then I want to mark the placement and poke a hole for the second circle that we're going to use for our string closure. It will be 4.25 inches away from either the top or the bottom edge of the flap. And then you will use your second ruler, or just measure any other way you like, to mark the placement for the hole 1.5 inches away from the craft cardstock edge of the flap on your left hand side. So 1.5 inches away from here and 4.25 inches away from the top. You will poke a hole and add your circle with the brad, and only after that you will glue the pattern paper in the back. And now I will take this piece to my sewing machine and stitch around. That's what you'll have. We can now add this flap to our base insert piece and glue it down behind. I will snip the corners off at a slight angle on the flap, like so. And now I will glue this down. Make sure that you glue this section of paper on top of the flap up to the fold line, like so. We'll start with the pattern paper. That's the design that I chose with the bird, and it will measure 4 1/4 by 5 1/2. I distressed the edges of this paper piece. Now you're going to need 2 pieces of pattern paper that will measure 2 1/2 by 5 1/2. Both of them are the same. And you're also going to need 2 pieces of acetate that will measure 2 1/2 by 5 1/2. They're the same size as these papers. Same size. We're going to create 2 pockets with these papers and the acetate pieces, and they will be positioned on top of the larger paper piece, like so. The bottom one will be lined up with the bottom edge of the large pattern paper, and the top one will be 4 1/4 inch away from the bottom edge. And I have already measured and marked the placement for the top pocket, and you can hardly see that on the pattern paper. That's why in the back I have written down how far away from the bottom the mark that you're going to make should be. On the pockets, I want to create a nice shape for the acetate to be seen through. And for doing that, you can choose any shape you want. You can make some measurements and maybe create a similar shape to the flap that we had. But I'm going to use this as my shape template. And I'm going to cut the shape right away since I have a metal edge here and it's easy to do it. This will be the shape of my pocket, and this is how it will look like. I'm going to add the foiled washi tape along the top edge as well, but first I want to cut the opening on my second paper piece. Don't forget to distress the edges. I'm going to line this piece on top of the acetate, and I will add the glue to all of the area of the paper and glue the acetate piece on top, making sure that I line both of them up together nicely. And now I want to add the foiled washi tape. I'm using the grid lines on the mat to line it up. And both of them are now ready. Now I will glue each one of those pockets lightly, really lightly, to the cardstock. One will be at the very bottom, lined up with the bottom edge of the paper. And one will be, I already told you that I marked the place to line up the corners of the top pocket with, on both sides, and I will glue it down like so. I want to take this piece to my sewing machine and stitch only here and later on this piece will be placed and glued down to the central section of our insert. For the flaps, we're going to need a few things. First of all, we're going to need 2 pieces of craft cardstock. They will measure 4 3/4 by 5 1/2, both of them. And then on the short 4 3/4 inch side, you will score this piece at 4 1/8 and 4 1/4. Make sure to cut the corners of the flap at a slight angle from the bottom up to the fold line. For matting these, you will need, for the front, 2 pieces of pattern papers, and that's the pattern that I chose. Both of them are 5 1/4 by 3 7/8, and on this one I wrote down that it's the bottom. On this one I wrote that it's the top, because I want to kind of continue the pattern that I have on the paper, but you don't have to do that. And then when they will unfold, one to the bottom and one to the top, you will also need the pattern papers to mat these flaps on the inside. You will have to pay attention to the direction of the papers that you're going to use. And that's why on this piece, which measures 5 1/4 by 3 7/8, I have also written down that this one will go on the top flap, and this piece that measures 5 1/4 by 3 7/8 as well will go to the flap at the bottom. We will set these aside for now and work on the pieces that we have here. I think that I also want to create a certain shape on these flaps. What you can do, if you don't want to get into all the shape thing, you can just use your corner rounder and round the corners on the flaps. As easy as that. I think that I'm going to once again use my tool right here to create a more interesting shape. And I will first of all create the outline on the craft cardstock base. I will do the same for the second piece. And of course, I will need to create the same shape on the pattern paper pieces that I'm going to use for matting them. So I'm just trying to see where exactly on which side of the paper I need to create the curve. Now when I have all of my shapes cut out, I will distress the edges of the pattern papers. You could create, again, a string closure to keep both of those flaps closed, but I think I'm going to do something different. On these flaps, I'm going to create a closure that looks like this. There will be a little belt and a strip behind which the belt will tuck. So to begin with, this piece is just a strip of craft cardstock, and I have glued the foiled washi tape on top, wrapped the tiny edges at the top and at the bottom, and then stitched along the edges like so. Here we have the focus. And then this piece is a craft cardstock which was folded in half So we have here double layer of cardstock, and it measures 4 3/4 by 1 inch. You can add whichever decorative stitching that you want to this piece. That's what I chose. And I have also used distress inks to color this piece. I glued the pattern paper to the front of the bottom flap. Then I clipped both of the flaps to the base of the insert in the areas where they will be glued down at the end. And I secured the flaps with the clips to make sure that they don't move. Now this belt part will be glued down to the cardstock base of the flap at the top, and I have just marked for myself the center so that it's easier for me to line everything up. The center will be at 2 3/4 of an inch away from either left or right edges of the flap, and then I lined up the belt, centering it there, chose the placement for it, and glued only this section down to the craft cardstock. Now I have to decide where I add the gold foiled strip for holding the belt closed, and I think I'm going to create 2 slits for connecting it to the flap. And again, I will just make sure that I have this centered, so I have 1 1/4 of an inch away from the strip to the right hand side edge, and also 1 1/4 from the left hand side edge. I am going just to hold this strip like that somewhere here, just to make sure that I have equal space from the left and the right. And I will mark the places for the slits to be cut out. They will be about 1/2 inch away from the edge of the gold foiled strip itself. So I'm going to just mark where I'm going to cut, and it's a little bit difficult to show on camera because of the busyness of the pattern, but as soon as I cut the slits through, I will show it to you and you will understand my idea better. Here are 2 of the slits that I have cut. Let me maybe just make them a little bit longer and more visible. Okay, so now from this side, I'm going to slide this piece with the foiled washi tape through the slits like so. And now I just want to make sure that I have equal parts sticking out in the back. I will glue them down, and I will also poke holes and add the brads in there. I think it will look better and more interesting like that. Okay, now I can add the pattern paper in the back of this flap and also unclip this flap from the insert. Mat that with the piece which had to go on the front, and also add a piece in the back. And now I am going to take these again to my sewing machine and stitch all around from this side of each one of the flaps. Okay, they're stitched. and they look really nice in the back and in the front. We are now ready to glue down the paper piece that we will use in the center. Okay, make sure that you position this piece on top of the paper with 1/8 of an inch border all around, from the paper to the edges or to the fold lines on the sides, like that. And next you're going to add the glue to each one of the flaps and glue this down behind, and you will line up the edges of the flap with the edges of the pattern paper. So the flap will be slightly narrower than the central area of the base of our insert. I'm going to glue down the bottom flap as well. Now I will take all of this to my sewing machine and stitch on this side around the edges of the paper, which is in the center. I really like how it looks when it's stitched. That's the back. Okay, and that's how our flaps will close. And for here, we will add our piece of string. You can add something to this tail of the thread as well. I think I'm going to add just 2 paper circles in there. But the thing is that right now we are ready. You know, I think that I will even tie tighter so that it will be easier for me to go ahead and glue this insert down to the inside of the back cover. Let me unclip this cute little embellishment that I have on the spine for now. I will use strong glue for gluing all of this down to the back cover. And I will start to line everything up from the outer edge of the cover. Okay, and I will have some time to move the page on top and line it up at the bottom and at the top. And then when I have the initial placement of the insert, I will be able to open all the folds and use my bone folder and burnish everywhere nicely and make sure that you glue everything down, especially here closer to the spine, where as usual we have a few layers of fabric and paper right here in these areas. If you want to, you can use the clips just to hold them there for a few minutes to make sure that it glues down nicely. I also want to create the large tag or a card. I don't know how exactly to call it, but it will be placed inside the pocket right here. I'll put this aside for now and give you the measurements for this card. First of all, the base piece of craft cardstock will measure 5 1/4 by 7 1/2, and I'm going to create a tab on it. I'll use the envelope punch board for that. So on the long side, match the corner here with a mark of 3 inches, then punch. That's the notch that we're going to have. Now I will move the cardstock piece to the right and I will put it somewhere in the center of that area there and punch again to get this. I want to trim this section of the paper off. I don't need it because I only need the tab. And I'm going to use my corner rounder and round the corners for the front of this cardstock layer. I want to add the pattern paper piece, of course, and also the vertical acetate pocket. So the piece of pattern paper measures 4 5/8 by 7 1/4, and the piece of acetate measures 2 1/4 by 7 1/4. And as you can see, I have added the gold foiled washi tape along the long edge and stitched on top. I'm going to glue it down only in the corners here to the paper layer. But before that, let's not forget that we need to round the corners here as well. I need to distress the edges and round the corners on the acetate piece as well, because it will go on top of the pattern paper like so. I can now glue down the pattern paper. After you glue the pattern paper down, you will glue the acetate down as well, and only secure it with the glue here in the corners where the washi tape is. And you will line up the corners of the acetate with the corners, with the rounded corners of the pattern paper. Now we will flip it to the back, and in the back we're also going to use a piece of pattern paper with the birds. It measures 4 5/8 by 7 1/4. I will later on glue it down to the craft cardstock base. And on this side of the card, I'm going to use a horizontal acetate belly band. So the acetate piece that I have measures 4 5/8 by 2 1/2. And I have wrapped the foiled washi tape along the long edges of it. I'm going to choose a placement for this belly band and secure it as before, only here in the areas where the washi tape is. I'm going to glue it down in the center like this. I will then glue down the whole paper piece down to the craft cardstock base, and I'm going to stitch all around and get this. This card or tag is now ready to be placed inside the pocket like so. You can choose your embellishments and keep on adding them to the pages of this insert, to the flaps, to the pockets. I am sure that in the overview you have already seen what elements I have added to this insert in my book. Now we'll start working on the ephemera holder, and for the cover of our holder we are going to need 2 pieces of pattern paper of your choice, and that's the pattern that I chose for mine, and also 2 pieces of chipboard. This is medium weight chipboard. The chipboard measures 5 5/8 by 8 1/4, and both of the paper pieces measure 9 1/4 by 6 5/8. So I'm going to glue each one of the chipboard pieces to the paper, making sure that I center the chipboard piece and leave about 1/2 inch borders all around. Here, both of our cover bases are ready. If you like to use the distress ink, go ahead and distress the edges of both of the pieces. Next, we're going to create the outer spine of our book. We're going to need a piece of cardstock and a piece of fabric for that. The cardstock piece is going to measure 8 1/4 by 2 3/4, and on the short side, you will score it at 1 inch from the left-hand side and also at 1 inch from the right-hand side. The piece of fabric is about 12 inches long by about 2 inches wide. What I'm going to do now is, first of all, I want to make sure that I fold the flaps of the cardstock, and I even use my bone folder to burnish them so that they're nice and crisp. And it's worth mentioning that the fabric will be on the outside of the cardstock. It will be covering this side of it right here. So after I burnished and reinforced the folds, I'm going to put the paper piece on the working surface like so and apply the glue right here. Now I'm going to cover it with the piece of fabric. I'm going to take this quickly to my ironing board, and now I'm ready to apply the glue on this side of the cardstock and glue the flaps at the top and at the bottom. I ironed this piece again. Let's reinforce the folds. Now you can use the distress ink and distress the edges. This is how the piece that I have created looks like right now. Next, we're going to create the inner spine to which our actual pages are going to be attached, and it will be created in the very same way as we did the outer spine. This time the fabric is going to be attached not to the outside of it, but to the inside. So the piece of cardstock, it's the same weight as the white piece that I have used before. It's going to measure 8 1/4 by 2 5/8, and the same way you're going to score it at 1 inch from the left and from the right on the short side. Now the piece of fabric that we're going to use is also going to be about 2 inches wide. Now when the central part of the fabric piece is glued down, don't glue the flaps just yet. We're going to work a little bit more with this piece right here. I'm going to once again reinforce the folds on the flaps because they will help me make some measurements. Okay, so here are our flaps. If you have a friction pen, it will be really good to use it for the next step. Once you fold the flaps so that you can see better what I'm doing, I will mark them with the friction pen, both at the top and at the bottom, because I want to see really good where I'm measuring. Okay, so our ephemera holder will have 4 double-sided pages, and each one of them is going to be 1/8 of an inch away from another. For measuring the places to where we are going to stitch the hinges for our pages, we're going to take a ruler and align it with the first mark that we have created with the friction pen. Okay, and you will see that the width of the space here between both marks is 5/8 of an inch. So you're going to mark now at every 1/8 of an inch between those lines, like so. You will turn it to the opposite side and do the same. Here we go. These lines will help us see where exactly we need to stitch each one of our 4 hinges. The hinges that you're going to need 4 of them, since there are 4 pages. Each one of the hinges is going to measure 8 inches long by 1 inch wide. I went ahead and scored it down the middle. So now with the valley fold facing up, I'm going to align the fold with the second pen mark at the top of the page, and also make sure that the fold is aligned with the second pen mark at the bottom of the page. And you will see that the hinge is shorter than the spine, and that's because we really need to see where the marks are and leave about 1/8 of an inch both from the top and the bottom. For holding the hinge in place, I'm going to use a paper clip. This fabric flap will need to stay unfolded, and you will understand why in just a second. So I'm going to secure the hinge on the paper with a stronger clip, like so, at the bottom, and then I will just remove it when I reach the bottom with my stitching, and I will make sure that the flap will be unfolded when I finish the stitch line there. So now you're going to stitch right from the edge of the craft cardstock down the fold line all the way to the bottom of the page, and you will stop at the end of the craft cardstock, and then you will pull the threads to the back of the white cardstock piece, and I'll meet you there. This is the result. That's the first hinge attached to the inner spine of our future ephemera holder, and this is how the threads look like when pulled to the back. Okay, I'm not tying double knots right now. I don't think it will be necessary. We will take the second hinge and we will do the same thing. We will align the fold with now the third pen mark, and when I'm putting the next hinge down onto the fabric and the cardstock, I just want to make sure that the top and bottom edges of the current hinge are nicely aligned with the edges of the previous one. So I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to clip it right here at the bottom. Make sure that you remove the paper clip and you don't stitch the fabric flap together with the hinge here at the bottom. I'm sure that you will not forget to unfold it at the top because you are starting there, but here at the end, just make sure that you do that. So I'm aligning everything and I'm going to stitch again. The second hinge is now attached. We have 2 of them here attached to the spine. Now I will, in the very same way, attach the third and the fourth hinges and get back to you. This is how it looks when all of the 4 hinges have been added to the inner spine. So the next thing we're going to do is you're going to either remove the friction pen marks using again your iron, or if you can't reach or you want to do it faster, you can always use your heat gun. This is how easy it is. Now make sure that you pull the ends of the threads nicely. Use a bit of wet glue for adhering the threads first. Just the ends of the threads. I spread the glue with my finger like that. So first I pull by all the group of the threads that I have there. Make sure I add the glue there. And now I can take the glue stick again and adhere the fabric flap to the cardstock, just like so. And as you can see, the fabric covers and hides all the ends of the threads that we had there, and it looks way better. Then I'm going to trim the excess of the threads and take it to my ironing board to iron this part right here. And you will do the same thing on the opposite side. The inner spine is now ready, and I have distressed the top and the bottom of the fabric flaps in the back of the piece as well as in the front, and I have also added ink to the folds. I'm going back to the cover and the outer spine of our holder. So we have the spine right here. We're going to make a mark using the same friction pen. The mark will have to be about 1/8 of an inch away from the fold. I'm using my ruler with the guidelines on it. Okay, here we have it, and we'll do the same. We'll sketch a line 1/8 of an inch away from the fold on the opposite side. Next, we're going to glue each one of our covers to the outer spine, like so, aligning the edges with the guideline that we have created. Next, I will remove the pen line from the fabric. The base of our holder is ready. The cover for it is ready. And we can work on the pages. You will need 4 pieces of cardstock, and the cardstock that I have here is 65 pounds. Each one of those 4 pieces measure 8 inches long by 5.5 inch wide. You can use craft cardstock as well, but I am going to use white since each one of the pages is going to be covered anyways with the craft cardstock pages on both sides. After that, what you're going to do is you're going to place each one of these pages inside the hinge right up to the fold of the hinge, like so, and basically sandwich the page inside the hinge. I'm going to apply the glue only to 1/2 of the hinge at first. I'm going to put the page inside the hinge, and before I press down, I just want to make sure that the top and the bottom edges are aligned with the edges of the hinge. Now I can flip it to the other side and apply the glue there, and now glue down the second half of the hinge to the white cardstock base. So that's one page now is attached to the hinge. And you will do the same with the remaining 3 pages, and I'll see you back then. Every time you're going to attach the subsequent page, you can use the previous page as your guide in terms of aligning the top and bottom edges. And once you're done gluing your 4 pages to the hinges, this is what you're going to have. The pages flip super easily. It will look really good. I had one book like this created before, and I really like it. That's why I decided to include a tutorial for creating one like this in a larger size in this tutorial, because I really think this is such a great way to store either labels or some other elements of your beautiful ephemera in this holder. The cover of my personal label and ephemera holder that I showed you before is covered with Mod Podge, and that makes it look a bit shiny. I think that before we get to building the slots and pockets pages for the inside of our book, we will go ahead and coat the cover with Mod Podge and leave it to dry, and while it's drying we will be working on something else. On the spine of my personal book here, I've used rub-ons from Tim Holtz, and I think that I'm going to do the same here. I will add just a few of them here and there. You can of course use your stamps, but don't forget that you need to use archival inks because you're going to wet the fabric. Distress inks are not going to work for that. While I'm working on this, I wanted to show you something. I started to cover the paper with Mod Podge, and the paper started to warp, but as it got drier, it was getting back to normal. I don't know how the paper that you use will behave. It might also depend on the printer that you used. If it was a laser or an inkjet one, you might want to try first maybe on a little piece of paper and see how it works. I have one coating here of Mod Podge applied, and I actually forgot that I wanted to add some gold foiled accents to the cover of this book, and for doing that I have a strip of gold foiled washi tape here, which was glued down to the absolutely regular printing paper first, and then I added strips of 1/8 of an inch score tape to the back of the printing paper. And then I used a ruler and a craft knife to cut those 1/8 of an inch strips off. So I have altogether 4 of them here, and I'm going to use 2 of them on the front and on the back cover, like so, closer to the spine, maybe half an inch away from the spine. And I also have 2 of these strips. I don't know how much of them I will really need, but I want to create the corners there to glue the gold foil strip diagonally in all the 4 corners of the cover. I'm going to peel off the backing from the score tape, and now I'm just going to eyeball where exactly I want my strip to be, and then I will flip it to the back side and I will secure the tails. Now let's talk about the corners. I want to create a template of the corner first so that I know at what angle exactly I need to glue the foiled strips down to the cover. So I will just take a piece of plain paper, and on a craft mat I will place it in one of the corners where the lines meet, and then at a 45 degrees angle I will cut the corner off. And that's my template that I'm going to put in each one of the corners. Now I'm going to apply the second coating of the Mod Podge. This way we're going to seal that gold foiled washi on the surface of the cover. Here I want to show you, I'm not sure 100% that the camera will be able to pick that up because the print that we have on the paper is very active, but maybe you will be able to see sort of bubbles on the surface of the cover here, and they will be flat once the Mod Podge dries. And now we can get back to our pages. For creating the pages that will go on top of the white cardstock bases, you will need to prepare 8 sheets of the craft cardstock, and I already have prepared 7 of them. So we are going to work on the 8th, and I'm going to show you the full process of making 8 pages the same way. So first of all, the page will measure 8 inches long by 5.5 wide, and it's basically the same size as the white cardstock sheets that we had. So in order to cut the slots and further on to add pieces of acetate to those slots, you're going to create a template so that it's easier for you to just use the template and make some marks on the craft cardstock instead of measuring each time on the piece of craft cardstock 8 times. So for creating the template, you're going to use just a plain sheet of printing paper, and on that sheet you're first of all going to mark a section which will be 5.5 by 8, and that's again the size of our page. And I have marked the top because if you will look at the page with the slots added to it already, you will see that the slot at the bottom is not the same distance away from the edge of the paper as the top one. We have our section, which is 5.5 by 8. Next, I'm going to either measure and make tick marks or use the ruler with the guidelines on it to measure and sketch the guidelines, which will be 1/2 inch away from the left and from the right hand side of my template, like so. We have 1/2 inch here on the right and 1/2 inch here on the left. And next we're going to create more tick marks, and they will be at 1.5, 2.25, 4 inches, 4 3/4, 6.5, and 7.25. So I'm going to mark them on the long side of my template on the left and also on the long side of my template on the right. Let's connect those tick marks now. I will use a colored pen to mark the lines where you're going to cut out. Let me show you now how to use the template. I have my piece of craft cardstock. I'm going to put it right in the borders of my template area, which is 5.5 by 8, and I will move it first a little bit to the bottom so that I can see where the 1/2 inch lines are on the left and on the right. And I will take my pencil and I will transfer those beginnings of the lines to the craft cardstock. Now I will move the cardstock to the top, and I'm still making sure that I align it with the edge of the paper, so both of the paper pieces are flush, and transfer again the marks from the bottom of the white paper piece to the craft cardstock. Now I'm going to do the same. I'm going to transfer these lines and marks to the craft cardstock. So I'm going to do the same. I will just slightly offset the paper so that I can see where the lines are. And I will do the same on the opposite side. Here are those lines, and I can now just once again connect them. And now all of my lines are on the craft cardstock. Next, I'm going to keep my template in front of me, just in case you forget where exactly you need to cut. But you will take your ruler, and you can see the 3/4 of an inch sections quite clearly. So you will cut on the sides of those sections and maybe on the front side of the cardstock. You will see better where exactly the cuts are. Okay, now we will do the same with the cuts on the opposite side. I will just create them the same way. Now let's make sure that we have our piece positioned with the wider section at the top, and we're going now to cut along the long lines from one previously created cut to another, and this is what we're going to have. For creating the pockets or the slots, however you want to call this, you're going to need for each page 3 pieces of acetate, and they will measure 5 inches by 1 1/8. The way you're going to glue them down is this. You will flip the page to the back, and you're going to slide the acetate under the cut section like so. Make sure that you have equal amount of acetate on the left and on the right. I used the art glitter glue to lift the piece with the acetate, and it also lifts the paper itself together with it. And I have applied a little amount of glue all around those edges and glued the acetate down to the cardstock. We still have the pocket unsealed here if you will look at it, but we will take care of it later. So now I'm just going to glue the remaining 2 acetate pieces down. If you don't have the art glitter glue, you might also use glossy accents. This step is done. Now let's look at the back of our page that I have already made before. We will need to use 1/8 of an inch score tape and add it right along the edge, along the long cut line that we have under each one of the pockets, like so. So I'm gluing the score tape down to acetate, super close to the cut line. And then you're going to add the tape along the 1/2 inch borders close to the cut out areas on both sides of the paper piece. And you still have the sketched lines to guide you. In the rest of the areas we can easily use wet glue. Next we're going to attach each one of the pages with the pockets or slots to the white page bases on both sides like this, and I will use wet glue for adding it to the areas which are not covered with tape. I will make sure that I start to glue my craft cardstock page to the white base from the right hand side, and I'm not attaching it down right away. I want to make sure that the edge is nice and aligned right here, and then I can glue down the rest of the area. Don't forget to use your bone folder. It's a very essential tool for our purposes. Okay, take your time, burnish everywhere, make sure that the glue is not oozing out, and that's our first page with the pockets glued down. Now I will do the same with the page on the back of the first white cardstock. And this time, always make sure that you have your page positioned correctly. So now I'm going to align it from the left edge, and I will have some time to move the piece and wiggle it a little bit, and then I will let it kind of fall down, and then I will burnish. Here is our first page in the ephemera holder. If you did everything right, your pockets have to be nice and sealed both at the sides and also at the bottom. And in the very same way, you're going to treat the remaining 3 pages of your holder, and I will see you back once done. I have glued all the pages down, and now you will see that even though you tried to do your best in aligning the edges of all the paper layers, you can still see a bit of white cardstock showing there. So what I decided to do is just to take a ruler and a craft knife and to cut off a tiny section of all the layers of paper together so that the edge looks just perfect. So I'll do that for each one of the 4 pages. I also want to explain why I didn't use any of the pattern papers instead of the craft cardstock on the pages, because I thought that I want to see the either labels or other pieces of ephemera that I'm going to add to the pages clear, and with the pattern it might be too distracting. While our cover is drying, I also wanted to take care of the end papers that we're going to use on the inside. And for those end papers, I have chosen this pattern with the feathers and eggs. And both of these pieces measure 5 3/8 by 8. I also have here 2 pieces of acetate, and similar to the way that I already showed you that I did in the bird themed journal, I wrapped the gold foiled washi tape around one edge of the acetate. The acetate measures 2 5/8 by 8, and I am going to add it as a pocket, as one long vertical pocket on one end paper, and then on the second end paper I want to create from one long pocket 2 smaller ones, and here we have it. This is how the back looks like. I'm going to use one of these end sheets on the inside of the front cover and the other one on the inside of the back cover. Before we glue our pages with the pockets to the inside of our cover, I want to add brads and connect the chipboard to the fabric and the cardstock of the spine together. I know we glued everything down, but over time, I don't know how glue will behave, although it's a strong one and it proved itself to be fine. But to be on the safe side, and also for the added decorative interest on the cover, I do want to use the brads. So our cover is 8 1/4 inch long or tall, however you want to call it. So the middle is at 4 1/8. Okay, so I'm going to mark the area with my pencil and use a poking tool about 1/4 inch away from the edge of the chipboard, and I'm going to poke a hole and add the first brad in there. Just secure it in the back. Okay, and then add 2 more brads, maybe 3 3/4 inch away from the first one. And I'll add the brads to the back cover as well. Here it is done. Now we can go ahead and glue the pages to the inside, and you're going to align the side flaps of your inner spine with the flaps on the outer spine. And this time I do want to snip the corners off just a little bit, maybe 1/4 or a little bit more than 1/8 inch away from that fold that we're going to have. I cut off at an angle. I'll do the same on the opposite side of the inner spine, just making sure that I don't cut right to the fold. We don't need that. Let's distress. Let's make sure that we have our cover positioned correctly, so this will be the front. And now my pages are placed like so, with the wider section at the top. Now we can take the strong glue again and add it to this flap here. And now they're the same height, so you will just glue one on top of the other. I think it dried. Can remove the clips now and do the same on this side. You will have to lift the cover to have both of the edges of the flaps meet, and hold it for a few moments to let the paper layer to get glued down to the layer underneath. And I'm still keeping the clips there to hold it in place. I can take care of the end paper here and glue it down. When this flap is dry, you will glue the second end paper down to the inside of the back cover the same way. The holder is ready now, and we can add our ephemera pieces to the pockets on the inside. We can also hold larger pieces of ephemera in the long pockets on the insides of our covers. And of course, you will have to decide how you want to embellish the front of your holder. I will go with minimal embellishments this time. I will do it offline, but I'm sure I have already showed you in the beginning of the video how it turned out.
Thank you so much for spending your time together with me today. I hope you enjoyed working on both the journal and the ephemera holder. I hope you liked it. I hope everything was clear. If you have any questions, as usual, please ask them in the comments, and I will do my best to get back to you as soon as I can. See you real soon again.